Today is Thursday, Chof Aleph Tevis Tovshin Ayin Gimel. We are in Teiras Menachem Sefer HaMa'amorim Tovshin Yud Aleph Tovshin Yud Beis, and we are on page Nun Aleph, chapter 3, in the Mamar Vayedaber Hashem El Moshe V'Aaron Lemer Zos Chukas Hatorah of Shabbos Pashas Shmini Pashas Porah. We began discussing the concept of Rotzu V'Shoiv, very famous idea that is discussed in Chassidus. Rotzu V'Shoiv, the Rotzu meaning the leaving, the going out, Shoiv returning. This is based on a pasuk in Ezekiel concerning the vision that the prophet Ezekiel saw on the river Kvor, where he describes the godly chariot, and he saw the various images there, which are angels, and they're called Chayas HaKodesh, the holy beings. And he says, "V'hachayas rotzu v'shoiv." These beings run forth and return. They go up and they return. And then I've explained that this is not only a characteristic that exists as far as the Chayas HaKodesh are concerned, these angels, but it's a phenomenon that exists in all of creation. Why? Because the godly energy that must be present in all of creation at all times has this characteristic in it. And therefore, since every activator, every operator causes that which is activated through him and by him to behave in the same way, so since the Chayas Eliki, the godly life force in creation, has this characteristic of Rotzu V'Shoiv, being drawn to its source, Rotzu, and then Shoiv returning, therefore all that comes from it and all that it gives life to has a similar characteristic. Including creatures in our physical world, including us, for example. Why then do we not? Well, we have certain things in our anatomy that testify to that point to that. For example, the heartbeat. However, when it talks about when we refer to the godly life force that gives us life, we don't feel this consciously. We don't constantly feel this being drawn to godliness and then landing back down into earth, so to speak. Why is that? Because we do not feel the godly life force that gives us life constantly. Therefore, we also don't have this idea of Rotzu V'Shoiv in terms of rushing forth to try to want to be attached to God, to go out and to be attached to godliness, and then returning. We don't have that constantly. Why? Because we do not feel the godly life force that gives us life. We don't feel that at every moment. We don't feel it constantly. Therefore, in the involuntary functions, for example, breathing or the heartbeat, we do have this idea of Rotzu V'Shoiv. Whereas the things that depend on our choice, the voluntary activities, for example, being connected to Hashem, for which we have bechir, for which we have free choice, therefore we don't in those matters which are dependent on our choice, we don't feel this Rotzu V'Shoiv constantly. That's basically the point that I've made. Now that why indeed does the life force, godly life force, have this characteristic of Rotzu V'Shoiv in it? Where does it come from? That's what the Rebbe is going to explain in Gimel. So we're on page Nun Aleph, chapter Gimel, Ois Gimel, chapter 3. To explain this phenomenon, to explain this idea, why indeed does the Chayas Eliki, the godly energy that gives life to all of creation, possess this characteristic of Rotzu V'Shoiv? Let's call it, what is it called? I think the usual translation of Rotzu V'Shoiv is flow and ebb. Ebb and flow. Ebb meaning, ebb is the idea of rushing out. Ebb is coming back, or flow is coming back?
Flow is going out, I think. Go with the tides as well.
Sorry?
Go with the tides.
With the tide, then what's the which one is the tide going out? Anyway, be that as it may, Rotzu V'Shoiv, ebb and flow, going out and coming back. we'll figure out which one is the
which is the
which is the flow. But that's the idea. The idea of the chayis of the key, the godly life force, being drawn to its source, to Hashem, to godliness, to God, and then coming back to give life to that which it's supposed to give life to. To explain this, the hini yadu, it is known we know that the light and the life force that gives life to worlds and to creatures, it is merely an emanation, an illumination. What does that mean? It's not the luminary itself, but it's something which comes from the luminary, like a ray, an emanation from the luminary that gives life to the world and to creatures. As it says in the pasuk, we say it in Ashrei every single day, a number of times a day. Malchuscha, malchus kol elamim. What is in all the worlds? Malchuscha, your kingdom. What does that mean? It refers to Midas HaMalchus, right? If we look at the levels of the spheres of the divine attributes, Malchus is the very end, right? What does that mean? If you remember, we spoke about Shechina when we learned the first Maimer, Basel Lagani of the Rebbe. What is Shechina? Shechina, who b'chol ha'olam l'fi inyoni, right? Shechina is the lowest of all. It's the level which alludes to Hashem, the level of godliness that Shecheres and Mislabeshes, the level of godliness that comes down and clothes itself in creatures down here, which means to say is the very last in each dimension, in each world, in each realm, in each dimension, at each level, according to its context. And as we explained over there quite at length. But the point being that what comes down into the worlds to illuminate the worlds, to give life to the worlds? Malchuscha, God's kingdom. The inyan ha-malchus ha'ara b'vad, the concept of malchus of kingdom is an emanation, is a ray, is but a ray. The melech shmoi nikra aleim, because when you talk about the relationship between a king and his subjects, what aspect of the king is called or is drawn over the nation? Shmoi, his name. This is the source of this phrase, Melech Shmoi Nikra Aleim, is from the Adon Olam that we say in davening in the morning. What do we say? Adon Olam Asher Malach B'Terem Kol Yitzur Nivra Le'eis Na'asa B'Cheftzei Koil Azai Melech Shmoi Nikra. At the time when, with his desire, through his will, everything was created, that's when his name was called king. That's when he was called king. So what do we see? Azai Melech Shmoi Nikra. What's the phrase? What's the quote? That is when he's called king. Which means to say, when we talk about the idea of Melech, it's similar to the idea of a name. What is a name? Just like a name is merely a ha'ara, merely an emanation, a ray, an emanation from the essence. But it doesn't touch his essence at all, which means to say that the name by which a person is called has no relationship, as it were, to the essence of the person, in the sense that it doesn't affect any real change in the person, whether he's actually called or not called. So too is this godly life force and energy that gives life to all the worlds. Right? So a name is associated with the individual. However, it's not the essence of the individual. It's merely a function. The name is something which an individual needs in order to be able to be identified by other people. So therefore, the idea basically is that Malchus is similar to Hashem, to a name, which means, in other words, that the idea of Malchus, which is the godly energy that gives life to all worlds and all creatures, is but a ha'ara, but an emanation from the very essence of Hashem. Now that we've established that the life force of all worlds is a ha'ara, an emanation, ha'ara hazois shenimsheches ba'elamis, this emanation that is drawn down into worlds, me'achar shehi ha'ara bilvad, since she is merely an emanation, behechrach yesh la sheresh u'mokir, one must say that it has a source and a root, shemimenu hi nimsheches, from which it is drawn. In other words, since it is not the luminary itself. It is an emanation from the luminary. It is an emanation from the essence. So therefore, it must come from someplace. It must have a source. That's number one. Number two, now that we've established that it has a source, it means to say that there is a situation where there is a level at which the ha'ara, this emanation, is wrapped up and included within its source. In other words, it doesn't start from outside of the source. It must start, where is it rooted? In the source. In its luminary. Therefore, the state in which this emanation is, when it is inside its source, obviously it is at a higher level. Right? So we've established that it's an emanation. If it's an emanation, it must come from someplace. If it must come from someplace, therefore, there must be a difference between the state of this emanation as it is outside of its source, i.e., within all of creation and within all of the creatures, giving them the ability to exist. There's a difference between that and the way this emanation is whilst it is still within its source. Therefore, this emanation is in a way of going out of itself. To go up and to become included and incorporated and wrapped up in its root and in its source. Right? Because it knows it has its consciousness is such that it feels that when it is in its source, it's at a higher level. Therefore, it's drawn to that. It's drawn to its source. And as mentioned before, what did we say before? What's the difference between malachim, angels, and for instance, creatures in our realm, like us, where the malachim feel this rotzu, this drawing out, being drawn to their source, they feel it constantly, and we don't, because the malachim feel their source. In other words, whilst the godly energy is within the malachim, they feel that godly energy, as it is a godly energy, and as it is connected to its source, and therefore they feel this constant draw to their source. Right? And that's true in every godly life force that gives life to anything. The difference is how much of it is actually felt in the creature which it gives life to, depending on whether this godly energy is revealed or concealed. But the characteristic of being drawn to its source is a common phenomenon to all the godly life force that gives life to all creatures. Why? It's the idea of wanting to go up and to be wrapped up back in its source. So therefore, that's the rotzu. That's the going out of itself. Whether it's the flow or the ebb, let's call it the flow.
I looked it up. Ebb is going. You talk about something being at a low ebb. It's the going out.
So that's going out.
Going down.
So the ebb,
low on a lower level,
and the flow is to go up.
Yeah.
So flow is rotzu, and ebb is shuv.
Yeah. Well, sure.
Or ebb means being drawn. Yeah.
No, ebb is to go. Is the flow out? It says.
Out. Flow out means to go up to its source.
Yeah, but it's talking about being at a low ebb. That's what it's referring to. Something that is
Might be a high ebb.
the flowing back of the tide as the water returns to the sea.
Okay, so this would there it means going lower, but the idea is that it's being drawn
It
away.
means shove, in other words.
So I think it's rotzo. I think
So
ebb would be.
as it returns back to the sea.
Yeah.
is
So that means the
sea.
chayes aliki returns back to its source.
Isn't that shove? Return.
No, that's in this context that's rotzo. Shov means coming back
No,
to the
not
body.
down, but that's the emanation.
I see.
No,
All right.
I believe that ebb is the rotzu, and flow is the shov. Flow means going forth. The ha'ora is the flow. Anyway, we can
But
look
ebb,
at
Yeah, well, that's
ebb,
right.
ebb is connected with, it uses decline and decay. So ebb is like going to a lower level. It's a deep.
I think
when a candle is burning up, when it goes upwards, what is that flow or is that ebb? A candle?
What is what? What does it do?
The characteristic of a fire being drawn upwards.
They don't use those analogies in this dictionary. It's the wrong dictionary.
I think it depends on the
The-
context.
I think so
In
too. And
terms of the sea, the source is the main sea.
correct. And
And
it's
if it returns to the main sea, it's the equivalent of the neshama
of the Rotzu going to
of
its source.
Malchus returning back to
Precisely. So I think.
The, we all,
So let's
we all understand what it means.
yeah. So Rotzu v'Shoiv. So let's call that the Rotzu. Let's call the ebb, and the Shoiv. Let's call the flow. I'll check
Why
it
don't
out.
we just use the Hebrew term?
Okay, let's use the
Shav
Hebrew term.
is
Fine.
returning back to its source, and Rotzo is Malchus coming out. No.
The other way around. Rotzu is from expression of running, going out. Shoiv means returning,
I see.
back down. Okay. So the characteristic of the Rotzu in the Chayis. Why does it? Sorry.
Well, all right. It wouldn't fit in with our analogy of the sea because the source is the highest level.
Right.
Is where is before,
That's why I think ebb
before
is-
Malchus is the beginning. So when you say returning, it must
Yeah.
return to
That's
its
what
power.
I'm with Harris on
It
that.
must return to its power. What the context you're using it is that it's coming back
It depends.
into the body.
Correct. That's
As
the
it
context that I
returns
was
into
using
the
it here.
body, the light is diminishing.
But look what he's saying over here. Lochein hine ha'ara zui b'chinas rotzu la'ales u'lekol b'shar shemakera. He says it clearly. Because the Chayas of the key knows that in its source it's at a much higher level,
Yeah.
therefore it's constantly in a way of rotzu, wanting to go up into its source.
Okay, just
Because he's looking at it, Harris, he's looking at it from
I
the perspective
understand.
of the creature,
I
of the nivra, of the
Yeah.
created being.
Flip
From the created being, the source is rotzu, is going away.
Shav is
And Shav is coming back into it.
I understand that.
Well, after this rotzu, after this going out, yeshna inyan hashev. There is the idea of the returning back into the nivra, into the created being. V'hainu, why is that? Lefisha hakavana ha'elyoina, because what is God's ultimate intention? What does He want? God wants God wants that there should be a revelation of light down here to illuminate worlds, right? Therefore, it also possesses the characteristic of what? Of returning, of coming back. In other words, this emanation, this godly emanation, has two characteristics in it that stem from two opposing characteristics that are built into its DNA. On the one hand, it feels its source, and it feels that when it's in its source, it's at a much higher level. Therefore, it's constantly in the mode of trying to get back into its source, Rotzu. On the other hand, God made this ha'ara, this emanation in the first place, for what purpose? For the purpose of illuminating the tachtin, illuminating the realms that are below, giving life to the worlds. Therefore, it possesses in it the characteristic of what? Of Shoiv, of returning, of illuminating.
Right.
So this is the source of this Rotzu v'Shoiv. This explains the Rotzu v'Shoiv. V'nimtza. Therefore, what comes out of this? She'oisa sirba she'ganu l'tnu derotzu da'na hergish mekayri hi ageremes l'shuv. What comes out of this is that it's the same reason, the exact same reason that causes it to be in a mode of Rotzu, of going out, which means feeling its source. This feeling of its source also causes its Shoiv, also causes it to come back down. Why? Because its source also desires that what? That it should illuminate down here all the creatures along the line.
So doesn't the whole thing depend on perspective? If you're down here, it's coming towards you going away.
Correct.
And if you're up there,
Obviously, he's talking here from our perspective. So going to its source is Rotzu. Coming back is Shoiv.